Okay, so last part of chapter 4 here, educator expenses. This deduction was recently increased. It was $250, now it's $300. So eligible educators, so there we go, we've got to define what an eligible educator is, can deduct up to $300 of qualified education expenses, so we've got to define what a qualified education expense is, as an above the line for AGI deduction. This is also on Schedule 1, line, they should say on Part 2 of the Schedule 1. So if the filing status is married filing jointly and both individuals are eligible educators, the maximum deduction is $600. So each of them can get the $300. Neither spouse can deduct more than $300 of their expenses. So that means if one spouse has $400 and the other one has $200 of expenses, their maximum is going to be $500 because that one spouse with $400 can only deduct up to $300, right? Taxpayers also have to reduce otherwise permitted qualified expenses by any reimbursements that were received with regard to those expenses. So what is an eligible educator? A teacher, instructor, counselor, principal, or aide in a kindergarten through 12th grade school who devotes at least 900 hours during the school year to that job. The school year being, August to May or whatever the school year is. So that is within the academic year. The $300 though is from January to December. So you just have to be it's essentially a full-time. That's not really a full-time. That's probably less than full-time teacher, but it is only K through 12. So alas, yours truly does not get it. So that's a qualified educator. What are the qualified expenses? Books, supplies, equipment, including computers and software, although find a computer for $300. Other materials used in the classroom. They also must be, and we're gonna talk about this whole concept again when we get to chapter 6. These expenses have to be ordinary and necessary. So let's define that real quickly. So ordinary is something that is common and accepted in the education field. So something ordinary, let's say I'm a high school accounting teacher and I'm teaching a unit on bookkeeping software and I purchase QuickBooks so that I can teach that then, or teach parts of it to my students. Well, that would be ordinary, right? It would be, that relates to what I'm teaching and it's commonly accepted. That would be fine, it is common. Now, if I'm teaching bookkeeping and I go out and I purchase a health textbook, that's not related to what I'm doing, right? That's really not ordinary in my area. So that would be something separate. Necessary does not mean that you can't live without it. Necessary means that it's helpful. So if the qualification was it has to be necessary, nobody would ever get to deduct much of anything because you could make an excuse that nothing is necessary. You can just do the math in your head. You don't need a calculator. But necessary means something that's helpful and appropriate in the taxpayer's educational profession. So we'll go back to the QuickBooks software. That's, that would be appropriate if I'm a bookkeeping, if I'm teaching, if I'm an accounting teacher at high school. But let's see if I can think of an example here. If I'm not teaching a unit on QuickBooks, then that is not necessary, right? It's not appropriate in my profession because I'm not teaching that, right? So ordinary and necessary, and like I said, we go back to this when we talk about business expenses. as well. We'll go over this quite a bit, this whole concept of ordinary and necessary. There's a third concept of reasonable as well. Ordinary and necessary is in the tax code. Reasonable is not in the, and reasonable as in price. Reasonable is not in the tax code, but it's something that's been litigated. So there are court cases out there indicating that that is one of the factors as well that has to be used. So if it's something that's now at $300, you're not going to get into anything that's terribly unreasonable here. Expenses for homeschooling or for non-athletic supplies for health or physical education courses do not qualify. So also they included recently professional development expenses, so they can take professional development courses out of pocket, and that can be counted as toward their $300. Personal protective equipment and other supplies, COVID-19 items used for the prevention and the spread of COVID qualify as eligible expenses. I don't know if that means that it's only, like if you're trying to prevent the flu, it doesn't count, but the spread of the flu, I don't know, COVID special, it's got its own classification. But like, you know, masks and hand sanitizer and stuff like that, Kleenex, I don't know. So it has to have been paid or incurred after March 12, 2020. I'm assuming that's still in effect. Anyway, so those are eligible expenses. Questions so far? Okay, here's an example. We've got William and Lakeisha, they're married, they'll file a joint return, both are eligible educators. William spent $420 on expenses for his 4th grade class, and he received a $130 reimbursement. Lakeisha spent $360, received no reimbursement. So in total, the couple spent $780, received a reimbursement of $130. However, William's deductible is limited to his net expenses of $290. Lakeisha's is limited to $300. So what you want to do is calculate each individual's separately, minus any reimbursements, and then add the two together, ultimately. Does that make sense? It's not a, it's not a terribly generous deduction. It's not, and we're talking about a deduction. So it's not, they're not getting $300 each or $600. They're getting, that reduces their taxable income by that amount. So if they're in the, I don't know, for ease of calculation, if they're in the 10% tax bracket, they're saving $60, right? So it's a percentage of that. So it's not really all that generous a tax deduction, but. Questions? Nope. All right.